You know, Kerry, if you and I did this chat, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, there would have been a lot of doom and gloom about the Giants. They've turned things around, and especially the last couple road series that they just played in, I think they exhibited a lot of character. Where do you see where this team has been? And maybe right now, is it that turning point everybody was hoping for?
Well, I don't know exactly if it's a turning point, Brody, but I do think that they proved a lot in the last 10 days or so. And like you said, it's a different conversation around this team right now because they went from their first 40 games after all of those offseason changes. It started with the new manager and Bob Melvin. Then you transition the top half of the roster, bring in Matt Chapman, Jorge Soler, Blake Snell, Jung-Hoo Lee, and you expect a different product, an entertaining product. What the Giants got through the first 40 games of the season was much of the same. Like they rearranged the characters and they brought in a new cast for this script, but it was the same exact lines that you saw in August and September of last year. And so what really impressed me over the last 10 days is, look, it's not against the Rockies. It's not against the Pirates or the Mets that you're going to show your true mettle as a baseball club. But if you do kind of rewrite what you're capable of, which is, you know, this team did not win coming from behind at all for the first 30, 40 games of this season. And they did a lot of that, starting with that Friday night win. I think it was the 17th of May against the Rockies, where they were down 4-1. Tyro Estrada hits a 3-run home run, brings them back. They score 10 in that game, 14 the next day. And then they go into Pittsburgh and they just, you know, take advantage of that bullpen. They go into New York. Patrick Bailey hits a big grand slam. They've now proven that you don't need to win 3-1 or 4-2 to win a ball game. And I think that that's really important for this team. And perhaps more importantly, for this fan base that was craving an opportunity to watch a different kind of a baseball club. So maybe they're just a 500 team that had a good week, but I also think that they're a 500 team that's capable of playing much better baseball as they just showed.
Well, as we record this, we are precisely through 54 games of the season. So we've got a pretty good taste of maybe who they are, not all of it, but some of it. And I do want to say this, one thing that does seem different is the approach to baseball from the franchise seems different. They're not doing the opener thing. They're not just platooning for fun. I mean, it does happen here and there. Certain situations present themselves, or if, you know, Blake Snell has to go on paternity leave, like you have to make alterations. But through 54 games, I think we've seen much more of a conventional baseball approach. Do you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that there have been situations where they've been forced into a bullpen game or they've had a platoon in right field because Mike Yastrzemski just doesn't hit left-handers. But I would say that the verb there is forced because I think that for the last several seasons, it's been a front office that has tried to get creative, that has attempted to look for ways to seize on every minute advantage that it can possibly find. And so you end up doing 3 or 4 bullpen games a week and you end up with 5 or 6 platoons around the diamond, and it may work. You may find a marginal advantage here or there. And when you don't have a farm system that's continuously producing major league talent, like that's a tactic you sometimes have to resort to. But it's been refreshing to see that the Giants have been forced into those decisions as opposed to coming out and saying, you know, Mason Black, he's not really ready to face the top of the order. We're going to have him be the bulk innings guy. And Kyle Harrison is only going to throw, against lineups where you've got lefties because we don't want him to see righties at the top of the order. They've thrown that out of the window. They've thrown these guys in the fire. They're better for it. The fans are better off and happier for it. And so it's been really refreshing. I think that's the right word to say around this approach from the Giants this year.
Yeah, and they also got forced into some position or personnel changes, I should say, because of certain people at positions, like when Conforto and Jung-Hoo Lee both go down with respective injuries, and we'll talk more about Jung-Hoo Lee in a second. I mean, that's so tragic. But when Conforto goes out for a bit, and Lee, and you're looking at probably the biggest threat, maybe in Conforto and the most consistent bat at that point in Jung-Hoo Lee, isn't it amazing that that's when the team starts to pick things up and get going, even offensively and winning games in late game situations? It's amazing that it took the absence of those two to kind of spark some of this.
It is really crazy, and it wasn't because Lee and Conforto were dragging down the lineup.
Right.
In fact, they were 2 of the more reliable players for this team. But I do think that, you saw the infusion of energy and youth in the club when you had to bring up Luis Matos and you had to bring up Elliot Ramos and Marco Luciano, who quietly replaces Nick Ahmed in a way that, maybe the Giants didn't plan for it to happen this early in the season. But these guys come up, and all of a sudden, they proved that they're major league caliber players. I mean, Luis Matos, at the time that we're taping this episode, his OPS is dipped under 700. So it's not going to be the 900 to 1,000, the National League Player of the Week caliber play. every single week. But what he is going to do is he's going to hustle for you. He's going to inspire some of the veterans around him, and they're going to be games that they win because of his style of play. And I think that that's really important. You can look at the numbers and then you can watch the game. And when you watch Luis Matos, you can see that he impacts the game by taking an extra base, by hustling in certain situations. And I think that that has a ripple effect up and down the lineup. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, Jorge Soler and Matt Chapman have had their best weeks after the kids came up and had their best week. Because when you see those guys producing, you kind of know it's on you at that point. And so you get into a rhythm, you're a month into your new home. And I think that all of a sudden, the Giants just became a lot more compelling and a lot more competitive as a result. And so it's been nice to see.
Luciano's obviously going through a little bit of a rut with the glove, but Matos and Ramos and the timing of their call-ups, you mentioned more out of necessity than anything else.
Yeah.
But how do you see it because it came from necessity? And the Giants said, well, we've got you. We need you right now. And look, in the long run, if they stay up, there might be some learning curve moments, some 2 steps forward, 1 step back type moments. But how do you see that particular trio fitting in, sustaining the rest of this season? Now that they're here, like, what comes next?
Yeah, I think the key is, one of those guys is always going to be on the roster for the rest of the year, basically, regardless of who comes back due to injury, just because the Giants will need a center fielder. And so if it's Matos that they like, he'll stay in center field for the remainder of the season. If they decide it's Ramos that they like, they'll put Yastrzemski in center field and have Ramos playing in a corner outfield spot for much of the year, I think. And that could be a possible solution, even though you're sacrificing some defense there. Luciano, to me, is someone who might go back to AAA only because the glove isn't where it needs to be right now. And I think they kind of tipped their hand a little bit on Sunday when they started Brett Wisely, a left-hander, against Sean Manaea, the left-hander.
Right.
That's not a situation where the Giants would have typically done that, but they just trust Wisely a little bit more right now. And I think there's open questions as to what position Luciano will play at the big league level, because you look at him, he's not a left fielder. He's not a right fielder. You're not going to play him at third base. That's Matt Chapman's spot. So, I think he's kind of stuck at shortstop right now, and maybe first base 2 or 3 years from now is a potential solution for the Giants. But right now, I think that one of those 3 guys will always be on the roster for this team, and that's great for fans. That's great for the players, and I think it's great for one of those 3 guys, whoever is on the team, because they'll have the long audition that they need to finally say, hey, I'm a big leaguer and I'm never going back.
It's great, but let's be honest, the reason it's happening is because center field is an open spot, and it's just so unfortunate what happened to Jung-Hoo Lee. He was the most, like I said, consistent, maybe even exciting player on this team offensively, and there was that stretch of like a week and a half where pretty much every Giants outfielder had a collision with some wall in some ballpark across the country. Such a freak thing. I mean, how do you begin to describe the downer that is the fact that he's going to miss the rest of this season?
Yeah, I think that we'd be talking about it a lot more if Luis Matos didn't follow up his injury with the National League Player of the Week award. I just think that it was overshadowed in such a major way that it makes us quickly forget that Jung-Hoo Lee was the marquee acquisition this offseason. You knew that if Matt Chapman has a great year, if Blake Snell has a great year, which he's not having, they're headed elsewhere. They are signing elsewhere. Maybe Chapman just gets a longer term deal from the Giants because they clearly love him. And I think that there is a great relationship, between Melvin and Chapman. But Jung-Hoo Lee was the one guy who you could project and say, this guy's going to be in his prime in 2026. He's only getting better. And they gave him $100+ million. And he was playing a great center field. And he was learning. You could see the steps that he was taking to where it wouldn't have shocked me at all if he was an above average center fielder and above average leadoff hitter by the end of his rookie season in the majors. And so I just think it's really, really upsetting for Jung-Hoo Lee more so than anyone, but for the Giants as an organization, because this guy had all the tools, all the pieces to put this thing together, and he's going to be robbed of that opportunity with a shoulder surgery that I think it's his second operation he's had on it. This is his second straight year that he's dealt with a major injury. That takes a toll on someone who's just 25 years old. And so it's going to be a major bounce back for him next year in terms of the mentality of how he appears in spring training, what those early at-bats look like, how the swings feel. And I just think this has the potential to change the trajectory of his career, and not necessarily in a good way.
Yeah. Something else that kind of softens the blow for Giants fans is that he is on a long-term deal. This is not a 2 or even 3-year thing. So 5 more years, you'll still get to see Jung-Hoo Lee. It's just that you're right. This rookie campaign and so highly anticipated, he can't do what was a really good job so far in the first 40, I guess, something games, almost 50 games of the season. Camilo Doval closing out games, and it's been a lot of roller coasters lately. So let's put that also in the equation. But I don't know that he has shown maybe the poise, maybe that slow heartbeat that everybody likes to talk about. I mean, there have been some interesting scenarios already, and not to nitpick too much, but I think even he wants, number one, more save opportunities, and number two, easier saves when he can close them out.
Yeah, it's been so interesting. And I just think like Camilo is someone where within the first three pitches, you have a pretty good idea of what you're going to get.
Yeah.
If he's spotting the fastball in the outside corner, the cutter, I should say, if he's able to throw that slider effectively, you're going to know within three pitches whether it's going to be a good outing. And if it's not, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if by the end of the season, Bob Melvin's getting someone up in the bullpen because he is either so dominant or he's so off, and there's so few in betweens. The thing about Camilo, though, is when he's off, he can still be a good major league closer. He can still be a competent reliever.
Yeah.
It's just it's going to be a wild show. Like you're going to deal with 2 walks and maybe a bloop hit, and rarely are you going to deal with hard contact. I think that's the one thing. It's like almost never does he give up a bomb or does he give up, a hard hit ball to the gap. It's every mess is Camilo's own doing. It's not like an opposing hitter beat him and squared one up. It's, Camilo got himself into this situation. And so I just think like you have to stick with him no matter what, because he's elite when he's elite. And maybe there's no one better save for a Mason Miller or Emmanuel Clase when they're truly on. But it is kind of reminiscent of the Giants' torture that you saw in the early 2010s with Brian Wilson and Sergio Romo at times.
Yeah, a little hectic, a little more hectic than you'd like to close out games that you have the slimmest of margins and you want to make sure it ends that way. I want to switch gears to LaMonte Wade Jr. Oh my goodness. Is it real? Do I have this right? A .472 on base percentage, which is better than Mookie Betts, better than Ohtani, better than Aaron Judge. I guess late night LaMonte just doesn't qualify in terms of at-bats or plate appearances to be an official league leader in that category, but I love this guy. I just love his style. It's not a name you were pinpointing from season to season, but he has a role. He's jumped into an even bigger one, so consistent for the offense and playing first base for Bob Melvin this year.
Yeah, it's Luis Arias if he had an eye at the plate. That's really what it is right now, because Luis Arias is making contact every single time he goes up there. LaMonte Wade Jr. is leading the league in walks on top of a .333 average. And that's what's most impressive to me is like he has figured out a way to put the ball in play and be a successful hitter while also having the most patient approach in all of baseball. It's rare when you watch a game and LaMonte doesn't get into a 3-2 count. It's rare when you watch a game and LaMonte doesn't draw a walk. And it's not like, he's looking for those opportunities. I just think like he has such a nailed in idea of what his approach is at the plate. And if a pitcher throws him one in the perfect spot, he'll put his A swing on it. But he's transitioned his game to where his B swing can still get him singles. And that's why you see a guy have the .472 on base percentage with fewer than 11 or 12 extra base hits. It almost doesn't make sense. The stat line is so different from the modern baseball player where it's an all or nothing. It's an A swing and you're hitting a home run or you're striking out. That it's really fun to watch. And I think that having him in the 2 slot in the order has made a difference for the Giants. It's kind of why, the Jung-Hoo Lee contact skills are missed for the Giants, and Luis Matos can try to fill that in. But those two, I really think that by the end of the season together would have produced a lot of theatrics and excitement for the Giants, because Lee had the ability to get on base and work counts, and LaMonte Wade Jr. is just as patient as anyone. And so he deserves a lot of credit because Giants fans have always known him as a patient player, Brody. But I think that he is someone who has quietly shifted his game and his approach in a way that maybe the broader world hasn't truly appreciated yet.
Don't you think, too, if the Giants do get to the postseason, that's the type of player you need? Like an on-base guy, a glue guy, a roll guy, a flexible guy. I mean, I see him in so many situations where even if he's not starting the game, here he is off the bench. Total difference maker in a postseason series.
He is the single player in the Giants lineup who no relief pitcher wants to see.
Yeah.
I don't know about starters, but 7th, 8th, 9th inning, I mean, they could have a guy hit 30 home runs if Jorge Soler goes on a heater, if Matt Chapman continues playing the way that he does, and you'd still rather face those two guys than LaMonte Wade Jr. because he's just that much of a menace in those situations. Yeah.
So clutch. Let's talk about Matt Chapman. We've already discussed, like, he's coming around. There was that span recently of 14 games or so, the batting average, just everything right, and also like making some defensive game-saving / game-winning plays. I think the confidence is there. I mean, the leadership has probably been there the entire time to the clubhouse, but it makes him a better leader to have the confidence and doing the stuff on the field that translates to being an actual leader in the clubhouse. So I hope that this is the case for him. If we don't know if the team is finally finding its stride, I hope for Matt Chapman's sake that his season is starting to click.
It's also another reason, like, I think we've gotten to a point where so many numbers are publicly available in baseball that we just analyze guys based on their OPS plus or, their weighted runs created plus and determine their value based off of that. And it's so quick to dismiss the value of just watching Matt Chapman play baseball, watching someone who, hey, his average might be slightly below league average. The OPS is going to be there. But if you actually sit down and watch him play on a day-to-day basis, he's a top 3 most exciting player on the Giants roster at all times. And a week like last week, he's the most exciting player in the National League. When he's, doing what he does at the plate and then mixing in the, Hall of Fame caliber defense, because that's what it is over there. He's not a Hall of Fame player, but the defense is Hall of Fame caliber. It's amazing to watch. And so, you say, oh, is he really worth the upgrade over a JD Davis? Or should you really let Matt Chapman play ahead of Casey Schmidt and let someone develop internally? The answer for me is unquestionably yes, because the highs of Matt Chapman are almost unmatched. And the excitement that he brings, like, it's an entertainment business. And analysts and fans can lose sight of that very easily. And Matt Chapman is just like the ultimate entertainer in a way that I don't think Giants fans have been treated to since Brandon Crawford in his prime.
Speaking of one of the other pillars, and actually I just saw it on my other screen, Blake Snell warming up to pitch on this Memorial Day, which is, by the way, when we're recording this. So if people see this tomorrow and we're not talking about his Memorial Day start, it's just because at this moment we don't know how this is going to go. But I do want to talk about all the starts and his season so far preceding this. We've seen a lot of swing and miss. We've seen a lot of the right things. We just haven't seen him be able to go deep in a baseball game, and obviously had the injury thrown in there to boot. So how do you even start to evaluate it? I mean, we're a third of the way through the year, and he's only got a handful of starts, none of them great. So where's he at moving forward here?
I think you're just running out of time. I think, like, the Giants have to realize, maybe Blake Snell has to realize too, that he's not going to live up to the contract this year. You're just too far past the point where that's going to happen. And so they have to get him to a place where, hey, just be as good as you can be. We'll take a Blake Snell with a 3.5 ERA. We don't need you putting the Cy Young pressure on yourself every time out, which I think that he feels coming off of that season, that he feels coming off of signing this big contract and trying to ramp himself up in a way that would get him ready to go. And, early in the season, facing the Rays, returning to Tampa, that was a big game for him. And he didn't have it that day. And I look at this week against Pittsburgh, he was close. He was closer, but the fastball command wasn't there. Yeah. And you can't get by against a major league lineup without fastball command. You may be able to do it in a rehab start at AAA. You may be able to do it in a rehab start at Low A San Jose, where Blake Snell struck out 10 or 11 guys. But you can have a curveball miss, you can have a changeup miss, but you can't get through a major league lineup if your fastball is consistently off, and it was last week. And so I think for him, it's just, be a second or third starter, reframe your mindset into what the Giants need you to do, as opposed to what you think you're capable of doing. And maybe you get there, but time has run out, in my opinion, for him to be a $30 million guy, unless they win a World Series.
I forgot about the perfect inning he threw at Muni Stadium a couple weeks ago.
Who could forget?
We won't count single A baseball. Okay, but let me counter you on this. What if he has a monster August into September in the time that the Giants need him most? I'm not here to say, oh yeah, March, April, May, June, and July get forgotten, but at some point, there will always be the chance for redemption for him. It just won't be as good as, hey, it was a great season for him. He'll always kind of have that in his back pocket, that if he has a really good stretch when the team needs him most, he could be a savior. Could.
Yeah, I would not rule that out altogether. I think that there's a higher likelihood of Blake Snell being that guy for the Giants than Robbie Ray, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery, because it's so difficult to come back from Tommy John surgery and have your A stuff right away. And so I think that Blake Snell, because he's not coming off the major elbow surgery, it's just an adductor injury for him, he can be that guy. But the odds of him living up to $30 million, I think if he has a great August and September, maybe it's 2025 that you're talking about. Wow, he gets the Giants into the playoffs. That's great. If he pitches the Giants deep into the playoffs, then you're talking about that being a possibility of, hey, this was worth it, and he may opt out here. But right now, I think it's just, getting him back into a point where it's competent, and then you can advance to, hey, the switch can be flipped here, maybe start thinking a little differently. But I think they've got to get him to stop nibbling on the corners and just start focus on throwing strikes and letting this defense that they also paid a lot of money for go to work behind him and do some of the job for him, because he is so much of that attack with the strikeout mentality that you forget that the guys who are having success on this Giant staff are Logan Webb and Jordan Hicks, and they are ground ball machines.
Right. What swing and miss turns into pitch count, right? Like then you're out of the game. You're out of the game after 3 1/3. So speaking of Jordan Hicks, I have this stat. He's allowed 2 runs or fewer in 9 of his 11 starts. I mean, so of all the other things, ERA, win-loss record, to me, it's a matter of, does he put the Giants in a position to win when it's his days to start? And for the most part, the answer is absolutely yes. The only concerning part, right, is that he's the reliever. Well, starter turned into reliever, but now reliever turned back into starter for this year. And I think I recently looked at his career stats. I think the most he's ever thrown in 1 year was 105 innings professionally.
Yeah.
5 or 6 years ago. So as we start to get to the 120 inning, 140 inning mark for Jordan Hicks, how do we see things going? I mean, they've been great so far, but is there anything to think about there?
Yeah. There's a lot to think about. And I've spent, more time than I'd like to admit thinking about it, because it's I think like with Kyle Harrison and Keaton Winn, you just say, okay, they reached their innings threshold. Like that's it. They're 22, 24, 25 years old. You just say, forget it. That's, you hit your number. We have to protect you for the remainder of your contract. Maybe we transition you into a bullpen role or something else. Jordan Hicks is not the pitcher who's throwing 100 miles an hour, just doing it 70 times a game now. He's not throwing 98 miles an hour 85 times a game. He's throwing 94, 95. And if you can reinvent yourself as drastically as Jordan Hicks has reinvented himself, maybe he deserves the longer leash than I initially thought, he might get from the Giants. Maybe it is let him pitch into August. And then, do you pitch every 6th or 7th day? Maybe it's, do you pitch every 7th or 8th day when the rosters expand in September and you're still throwing 75, 80 pitches at 94, 95 miles an hour? Because the thing is, Jordan Hicks can be really effective and be really good at that velocity. And it's clearly not taking the toll that the 100 to 102 took on his arm when he was an 8th and 9th inning guy in St. Louis. And so I think they can get far more creative with Hicks than I initially thought, because he's just way more effective than anyone could have anticipated in dialing back the velocity by 6 to 7 miles an hour.
I saw that Cobb was starting a throwing program pretty soon. And obviously we talked about Robbie Ray, and Tommy John surgery is intense. And even if it is around the All-Star break, that's still a question mark. Nothing is for certain when you come back from that. But if one or both of those things happen for those two players, are the Giants suddenly that much more dangerous down the stretch? Or is it just something that might be reinforcements to other injuries that might happen? How do you see what might lie ahead down the line?
I don't think they become more dangerous. I think that baseball teams and executives in particular, when you've got a guy who's on the injured list, love to tell people that just wait until we get him back. He's our trade deadline acquisition.
Right.
And I think that's just ridiculous. It's always been a flawed way of thinking, because if you're adding someone from the outside, it's different than someone who was on the injured list on the payroll to begin with. And so I don't think that either of those guys, unless, Alex Cobb at 37 years old, post-surgery, becomes the all-star caliber pitcher that he was last year, transforms the Giants rotation. Robbie Ray's not going to have the A stuff coming back. It could be, mid-rotation stuff, but it's not the Cy Young caliber arm that the Giants could get next season. And so I think that they're just reinforcements. It's when Kyle Harrison hits his innings limit. It's when they need a solution for Mason Black and Keaton Winn, however they fill out this spot in the rotation. I just think that these guys are fill-ins, and they're probably mid-rotation fill-ins at best.
So we're multiple months even away from the trade deadline, but if we're panning it out here at the end of May, would the Giants be buyers if the situation is right, or are they definitely not buyers? Are they stand patters? Wait, nobody ever says that. What are their even options maybe at the trade deadline if this season starts to trend in the right direction? What options do they have trade deadline wise?
I mean, I think that with the investment that they made this offseason, they wouldn't say we're selling. They wouldn't say we're standing pat. It might not be, a Pete Alonso type buy or a Mason Miller type buy.
Oh, wait a second. No, I honestly, I do think people think I'm crazy for saying that he's not on the market. I think he's going to be on the market somehow, some way. The A's will listen to offers because you know why? His value can get higher, but not that much higher. People are aware of what he's doing right now at the highest of levels. You got all those years of team control. I don't know that the Giants are interested, but you know what? Other teams competing with the Giants might be making those calls.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, if the A's were to trade him, just as a quick aside, they'll win that deal because you can't sustain that excellence for 6-7 years. I mean, you can do it for 1 year. You can help a team win a World Series this year. Relief pitchers don't do that for 6 to 7 years.
Right.
Mariano Rivera didn't do that for 6 to 7 years. So the A's will win that deal if they do trade him, which I think is the incentive to trade him. But as far as the Giants go, I just don't see ownership crossing the luxury tax threshold, being at or around 500, knowing that 1 or 2 additions could put them over the top and get to the wild card, and knowing that they have a lot of pitching depth in the minor leagues. And maybe they're not, top 10 prospects in baseball. Maybe they're not top 20 prospects in baseball. But the one thing that other organizations crave is pitching depth. And the Giants have it this year. They don't have position players coming through the farm system. They don't have the one hitter who's going to blow you away, but they can execute a deal for a mid-rotation starter, an arm that they need, because they've got pitchers in the minor leagues. And so that's why I think, a soft buyer right now is kind of what I'd call them if we were projecting out 2 months.
Well said. Well understood. I mean, that makes sense. Soft buyer. I think that's probably the way to go. All right, last thing here. We're a third of the way, again, through the season, and we're basically where they started. 500 record. Like 0-0 is not different from 27-27. But looking back at the Giants-Dodgers series, which we've seen a lot of so far, I mean, it's been pretty one-sided, and the Dodgers are doing their own thing. I know they're on a little bit of a losing skid as we record this, but is it just the idea that the rest of this season for the Giants is find a way into the playoffs? I'm not saying cross it off that you'll win the West, but find a way in the playoffs, do some damage there. Is that what you see as the goal, and how possible is it that they can attain that?
Yeah, I think that has to be the goal. I think that they'd be fooling themselves if they thought about the division and said, we're going to track down the Dodgers and that's going to happen this year and that should be our goal. It should just be to position yourself to win a playoff series, to get in and see what happens. Make sure that your arms are lined up so that you've got Logan Webb and then 2 other guys that you trust. And, they've got the arms to get them there through 162. Now they have to figure out how to deploy those arms. Yeah. It's, do you shut down Harrison? Do you come up with a creative solution for Jordan Hicks? How do you reintegrate, Cobb and Ray, which we've already touched on? And so I think that it's get to the playoffs. And I would say that, I've got a 50 to 60% feeling that they will. I think that it's a pretty hungry organization. And I think that there's so much mediocrity in the National League that if you make 1 or 2 smart moves over the course of the season, you're going to separate yourself by 3 or 4 games. And that can be the difference. It's like 85-86 to get in the National League. And if the Giants can't get that, it's not going to bode well for them.
Well, like I said, it's really that nothing has happened so far, but we're not any further understanding this team a third of the way in.
Exactly.
So maybe this next third or the final third is where it's really going to get spicy and interesting. And hopefully for the Giants, things will work out. Kerry, I really appreciate your time. You have like 7 or 8 jobs. You just hopped off KNBR to do this. So just want to wish you well in everything that you've got going on. And thank you for the time and opportunity to chat.
Thank you so much, Brody. I love your channel. Love what you're doing here, and love the comments on these. So I'll be diving in and reading all of them.